This is probably one of the things that I needed to hear when I started this job, and I never did. And it was a misconception that almost set me up for failure. Mental health in the fire service is one of the most talked about and least acted on topics in this profession. We talk about it at conferences, we put up posters at the station, we have CISM and CERT teams. We see the unimaginable and then go back to the hall pretending everything is fine. Or worse, we sit next to members who scoff when mental health is even mentioned. Today, I'm sitting down with our in-house psychotherapist, Riley Thompson. Riley works directly with our Everyday Heroes clients and has spent years in the trenches with high-pressure athletes and first responders who are navigating the real psychological cost of this career. Today, I'm gonna ask him the questions that I wish I had answered when I started this career, and he's gonna do the same to me as someone who's learned to navigate the difficulties this career has presented over the last decade plus. So this goes both ways. Let's get into it. So I got some questions prepared for Riley, and Riley has some questions that are prepared for me. And I think the reason that this is going to be really beneficial is I think there's some insight from the tactical boots on the ground perspective that might be different than the academic clinical perspective. So we're going to kind of go back and forth. It's going to be pretty laid back, pretty candid, but hopefully you guys find a ton of value. So we're going to put this on its head. Usually the person would ask the therapist a question to start, but the therapist is going to ask a firefighter a question to start. So let's get into it, buddy.
Let's do it. So part of the framing that I use in my work as a psychotherapist, it holds the idea that in any given day, any situation that we're in, however big or small, we can move towards the person we want to be, or we can move away. And no person moves towards the person they want to be 100% of the time. My question for you is, in moments when you have shifted the pathway that you're on, and you've changed direction, what has helped you know that you are on the path that you want to be on versus not the path that you want to be on?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot, and I think it's whether with your mental fitness or your physical fitness, we all have like our intuition. I think our body, our mind is very good at speaking to us. And whether it's physical pain or emotional pain, I always say that those are requests for change. So for me, I think intuitively you kind of know when you're in alignment versus when you're not in alignment. I feel like your body, the universe kind of reinforces when you are on the right path. So I know for me, there's usually a certain amount of uneasiness or resistance when I'm moving away from the person that I want to be. And there's a kind of flow state, there's an ease, there's an alignment when I'm moving towards the person that I want to become. I think a lot of us are constantly getting those signals from our mind and body, but the hard part is that willingness to listen. And I think the more introspection, the more self-awareness that you have, the more you're able to pick up on those signals. I think it's something that I'm still working on, but I've got it 1,000% better at. Is before, not only was I not listening, but I think I was actually like numbing, distracting, and trying to avoid those uncomfortable feelings. And as I've learned to manage and live with those experiences, I'm now very in tune with picking up on them and being able to course correct when that happens. So I think we all intuitively know, and we'll have feelings, sensations, thoughts that kind of validate that we are on the right path.
Mm-hmm. And to make it really practical for someone that's hearing that and says, it would be nice if I just knew, but I can't tell, or it's hard for me to know, or I get caught up in the day-to-day life. Do you have any, whether or not it works for everyone, or just what's an example of something that has worked for you to notice that unease or that discomfort that has been that helpful signal for you? Is there any like specific literal ways in which you've been able to kind of interact with your gut feeling?
I think it's just the willingness to listen. I think us as first responders is like you tell a firefighter, go sit in a room for 10 minutes with no phone, no distraction. And they're like, I can't. I can't stop working. I can't stop moving. We've become very, very good at go, 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 being reactive. We're geared towards that sympathetic tone, that fight or flight. So us actually having this stillness, and that stillness being the prerequisite or the requirement to listen, that is the hardest part. And I tell people, and we did a practice not too long ago amongst our community, and I said, sit in a room and I want you to, take a couple of deep breaths, find that comfortable spot, find that safe space. And we walked through three things. We said, I want your physical body to come into that room. And what do you notice? What are they telling you? I want your emotional body to come into that room sitting across from you. What are they telling you? I want your spiritual body, whatever that means to you, to sit across from you. What do they tell you? And every single person, when they took that 5 to 10 minutes to have that stillness, do that deep breathing, have that introspection, every single part of their soul, their self, their psyche was telling them exactly what they needed to hear. And again, I think people actually always know, we just don't listen. So for me, I think the biggest thing is like, I'm not a meditator. I'll be the first one to admit that like I find that that is very, very difficult, but I love to cycle. I love to run. I find the repetition of those cyclical movements allows my brain to be occupied enough that like that reticular activating system, that like incessant voice that doesn't stop, is able to quiet enough that I'm able to do that deep thinking. And I think that's why running has been so impactful for me, is because like it's allowed me to move through a lot of the more difficult experiences that I've had, because it allows me to look inwards. So I think that would be the biggest thing, is just like having the awareness and being still enough to pick up on those signals. And then I think in terms of like the validation of if you're on the right path or not, like I always break it down to the people that I work with as it being really simple. And I think this is very tangible because people know both sides of this coin, is like there's the difference between being tired and being exhausted. I think when you're not in alignment with your true self, your higher self, whatever you want to call it, you're exhausted. You're sick of your own shit. You feel like you have nothing left to give. You have no energy. You know the work that you should be doing, but you're not doing it. And there's also an amount of guilt and frustration that comes with that, that just leaves you feeling depleted. And then there's tired. Tired is being being a little bit drained from doing the work that you know you need to do, from taking those steps, from making the hard right decision over the easy wrong. And I think those are very two different things. And people know again what the differences are. And I think that is the validation for people knowing like if they're on that right path.
Right? It reminds me in sports of, are you just hurt or are you injured? Right?
Sure.
And there being that difference there.
Yeah, 100%. And we're gonna get to something, I think, the hurt versus injured, here in a second. But my first question for you, Rye, is like, what do you find first responders struggle with the most? Like in your practice, like what is some of the most common things that you see? Because I think for me, when it came to my mental health, and the reason that I'm so willing to be open, honest, and vulnerable is like, it was so refreshing to be like, oh, it's not just me. I'm not alone. So I think like being able to hear or validate the experiences that you see in your practice for someone that might be watching, of like, what do you find is some of the most common things that you experience?
Yeah, I think with this line of work, more than most, if not all, is the amount of stress and weight that comes with the day-to-day experiences, and how you can go into a day having no idea what it's going to look like. And it might be a really light day and easy and you enjoy it with your crew, or you might go into the day and it's the most heavy experience you've ever had in your life. And to go into each day knowing that that's a possibility, that just knowing that is has a weight to it.
Mhm.
And so the type of questions that I've kind of had with the first ever first responder I've worked with, and that has been the question that comes up most often, is um, things along the lines of, how do I deal with that weight and not burden others with it? And first off, there's no one clear answer to do that. It's a pretty unique personal challenge to carry the weight that we have. And as you said, a big piece of it is getting more in tune with our body and more in tune with what that weight actually feels like and how it's impacting us and affecting us. That is useful information. Where our mind typically goes when we feel that stress and that weight and that burden is, how do I get rid of this? Because it's uncomfortable. I don't want to deal with it. I just want to move on so I can, be happy and cheery with my family and friends. And there's so many ways in which we've seen this in books and movies and podcasts, of the idea that the way through is the way. It's not around, it's not over, it's not ignoring or turning away. It's, can I strengthen myself to be able to carry this weight? And it's difficult work, and it takes time, and it takes introspection, and it always takes the support of others. And so having a community of other people that can relate to the type of weight that you're feeling is one small way of having a little bit less weight that's on you solo. And in my work, it's someone just having an open space to talk with someone else. And I'm committing an hour a week to talking with a professional is a way to share some of that weight. It's not getting rid of the weight or pretending like the weight's not there. It's how do I get better at handling it? And so there's a lot of really unique individual ways that people can do that. And what my first approach is, what are some weights that you've had to hold or lift throughout life in the past, right? In other ways, even before this line of work. And you have strengths that help you deal with the heaviness of life. Let's first really tap into those, see if we can build those up, enhance those, allow you to, use your natural strengths. And then also maybe we learn and work on some new skills and abilities to help deal with the weight and the heaviness of the work. So it's a process. It's something that we progress through. There's not one clean answer of this is how you do it. For me, my job and my role is to really deeply understand you and how you have been dealing with it. What's been working? Let's keep doing that. What hasn't been working? Okay, let's shift somewhere else.
For sure. I think like on that note is like as a third generation firefighter myself, like I asked my dad, like, what was retirement like for you? And on that note of the weight that we harbor as first responders, as individuals on a day-to-day basis. And I can see that that question comes up so often because in our line of work, I always talk about how we have all the other stuff that people go through. And then we have our work that's a massive slab, a massive weight on top of that. And my dad said, like, son, it was just like the weight of the world came off my shoulders because we have become so used to being the people that others, rely on, being the people that show up on others' worst day, that weight that we carry just becomes normal. And we don't really know the burden of that weight until we're finally through it on the other side and we can feel that relief. And unfortunately, for a lot of us, we're in it right now. So we're going to have to learn to build the resilience, the capacity, the tolerance to shoulder that weight. But another thing that my dad mentions is like there is an end as well eventually, right? To be able to take that off. So that's such a great insight. And yeah, I think a lot of us are carrying around a lot of baggage, whether we know it or not. But having that awareness is definitely step number one.
One more thing I'll add to that too is being willing to share with others, be vulnerable with others, and to offer up, hey, I can help carry some of your weight, has this weird, interesting effect where it actually lightens our own weight, right? Being able to be that person who's a giver and willing to lend a hand, it has this really cool effect on us that is a meaningful thing to do, and living life with meaning is one way to better handle the weight that we face.
For sure.
Kind of going back to this framework, I pull from a lot of, we can steer towards the person I want to be or the life I want to live, and we can steer away from it. And all day long, different things pull us in different directions. When we steer away from the person that we want to be or the life we want to live, it's oftentimes because we get hooked by really strong thoughts or feelings. Every situation that we're in, no matter what it is, automatic thoughts and feelings pop up. So on a difficult call or a difficult situation at work, without you choosing to have certain thoughts or feelings, they are going to show up. And one of the biggest challenges to living the life that I want to live is when the thoughts and the feelings that I didn't choose grip me and tug me away, right? So if someone is treating me or someone else poorly at work and I get frustrated and angry and then I say or do things angrily, right? I can get really hooked by that frustration. And that's not good or bad, that just is. My question for you is, throughout your time as a first responder, what were some of the strongest hooks? It could be really specific, like thoughts or emotions that got a good grip on you and that might have that effect of pulling you off of who you were.
Mhm. I mean, I think it goes without saying there's always going to be those calls. And I think for anyone that is watching that isn't a first responder, like you see the visuals on TV and movies, but I think the thing and what we know about memories is the more senses that are involved in a memory, like the more or the more readily that memory or that experience is imprinted on your body and nervous system. So when we go through these calls, there's the smells, there's the sights, there's the sounds. And I think those are the things that can really hook you in when it comes to an actual call that is very, very difficult. But I would say just as like an overarching emotion, I think like anxiety was a big one for me. Kind of letting anxiety like dictate my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions, my reactions. And I think the job is a big part of it. I tell a lot of first responders, you are literally trained to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. You are woken up in the middle of the night by the wolf screaming at you. Like your life is anxiety. And I think there's a certain amount of conditioning. We think of Pavlov's dog. You ring that bell, he's salivating. He doesn't know if the food's coming or not, but like that automatic, autonomic behavior, us as first responders are the same. And every single first responder out there, or most, I don't want to project or speak in generalizations, but I know after a couple of days off, when I'm getting back on shift the next day, that night before, my body's ramping up because it knows we're about to go back into game time. So I think for me, like learning to navigate that anxiety, channel that anxiety, and being aware of that anxiety was a big thing. I think one thing that we might talk about a little bit later that was huge is like, yes, the job was a part of that, but I think anxiety was a big part of my life for a long time. And I think one thing that I want all the first responders that are listening to this to maybe think on or reflect on your experiences before you became a firefighter, a paramedic, a police officer have a massive implication on how you are going to process the experiences when you become a first responder and what comes up for you. So that was really big for me of understanding that like that anxiety I was feeling, yes, was it the job? Was it elements of the job that were contributing to that? Sure. Was it a lot of like my kind of younger childhood experiences that were also feeling that? Absolutely. And what we're going to circle back to a lot here is that like that awareness piece of like, okay, now I know why I am the way that I am. How can I change it? And I think there's a very powerful equation when it comes to these very powerful emotions that I think of often, and that is suffering equals pain times resistance. The more you resist those uncomfortable feelings, the more pain you're going to experience, the more suffering you're going to experience. And another very tangible analogy is like the beach ball analogy of like, if you take those strong emotional charged experiences, if you take those emotions like anxiety and you try to push them underwater like that beach ball, what do we know? The farther that we push that ball down, the more that it wants to come up. But if we're able to sit with that ball, sit with that experience, ride that wave of emotion, there's all these cliches, but they're so poignant, they're so true, is like it's our ability to navigate and live with those experiences and integrate those experiences, which is a big thing that we understand about trauma now, is the idea of integration and living with this stuff. So I think that was it for me, was like the experience of anxiety, understanding why I was feeling that way, and learning to integrate and not resist those emotions. That was the most liberating thing because as human beings, we're supposed to just feel good, right? Everything's supposed to be great. We're supposed to feel happy. And when we have bad emotions, we want to push those away. We want all the good emotions, but we don't want the bad ones. But what we have to realize is that that pushing away is actually the thing that is going to make those emotions more prevalent in our life. So yeah, for me, it was definitely that sort of just like that heaviness, that anxiety that I was carrying. And as soon as I learned to like live with that and not fight that and just know that experience, that emotion made me human, that was, like I said, liberating is the only word to really describe it.
And just as a quick follow-up to that, I think that's such a clear feeling that I think a lot of us can relate to of, you know, that tension between pushing something away and it coming back around at some point, right? And is there can you peel back the curtain in any ways of like, say if anxiety showed up for you tomorrow, like what, say that was 5 minutes of you being aware of, like, what does that look like, how you work through it in the moment now that you've had some experience with it?
Yeah, and I hope for you guys that are watching, like this for me was just one of those reframes that was like, boom, like it hit me so hard because it was so simple. And I think the things that are most powerful in our life are the things that are most simple. You don't think anxious, you don't think depressed, you don't think sad, you feel anxious, you feel depressed. So the moment that I was just able to feel that stuff and stop trying to think my way out of anxiety, stop trying to tell myself a story as to why I was feeling a certain way, and literally just, somatically worked through that, just like let that discomfort sit in my body and just let it do whatever it had to do. instead of it being 4 hours of me ruminating and trying to distract myself and think of other things, when I just let that process through my body, that to me was just like 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 it was just like that, all that resistance that I had felt before, it moved through me and it was gone. Instead of like, minutes, hours, days of trying to fight this stuff, literally just being able to sit with that discomfort was huge. And I always tell people, and physical fitness is a great thing of like, if you can willingly seek and sit in discomfort, it is going to allow you to build the resilience that we've already talked about, just to handle that shit better. If you think that distracting or not prioritizing yourself is going to somehow allow you to navigate these difficult experiences in life better, I hate to tell you, you are very, very, very incorrect about that. Cause like we need to build our tool set. So for me, it was just like as simple as it sounds, but just sitting with that. And I think that is a skill in itself, but that was the biggest thing for me. It was just like sitting with those emotions.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Maybe I got a future in this if firefighting doesn't work out. What is the most common misconception about first responder mental health?
We may have touched on it a little bit, but I think there's this truth to like, there's a toughness that comes with being a first responder that's necessary. And we hear mental toughness a lot, and obviously the physical toughness is a part of it. I think that one of the biggest misconceptions is like, what does toughness look like when it comes to some of the stuff that we're talking about, right? I think a misconception is, hey, you had a tough call, like deal with it, move forward, like just move on, get through it, like power through, right? And that toughness is being able to power through. And the misconception that, hey, like don't whine, don't make excuses, right? Like you don't need anyone else. We're here to help others. We're not the ones that need help. And one of the things that I've seen with first responders, but really with everyone, is that that's not how life works, right? We're social beings. We need each other. There's a reason why we're not the type of species that's off living solo, right? We live in groups, and first responders are human beings that have the same needs, the same vulnerabilities, and they have voluntarily chosen to step into a role where they're called upon by a lot of people, and they're called upon to do dangerous work and put their life on the line. And to be tough in that line of work, I don't think it fits the narrative of just push through it and get through it. Just, do what you have to do, right? There's layers of humanity that we need to address in first responders that I think sometimes isn't addressed with that sort of tough mentality. And it's not that they don't need to be tough. It's like, let's reframe, re-understand what toughness looks like and means. And for a first responder, there's, the toughness of, whether that's seeking support or being vulnerable, but also like what you said, sitting with your feelings or meditating might not sound tough in how we hear about it in society, but try to sit down for 10 minutes without your phone, without entertainment, without anything, just with your thoughts. Like that can be a scary thing to do. That can be challenging, especially if you've just been dealing with some heavy stuff. And you might not be able to do that alone. And when you start, and I think a goal and sort of a path that we can be on to develop toughness, and especially for first responders, is, can you get more in tune with what you feel and think? That's hard. That takes a tough person to be able to do that. And so being willing to put yourself under physical tension makes you physically tough. To be able to sit with the mental and psychological tension is going to make you psychologically tough. So just reframing what toughness looks like, I think is a big piece of that.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, on that note I always say like vulnerability is the greatest sign of strength. And I've noticed this in my career. It's usually the firefighters, the people with the harshest, crudest exteriors that sometimes are the most internally fragile, because I think they've had to build this armor up because they're really physical. They're very intimidating because they've done all that physical stuff, but they haven't done the mental work. And I think that sometimes is the hardest thing. And that is what true toughness is. And I also say too of like, we talk about sitting with your feeling. It sounds so fluffy and fragile, like, ew, like I don't want to do that. But I'm like, I would rather be a warrior in a garden. Like I would rather build all these things up. I can be intense. I can be, the shoulder to cry on. I can be the vulnerable person, and I can be the intense person. I would rather be like that warrior in a calm state than be a gardener at war, where like I haven't prepared myself. I haven't done any of the things that we talked about, and now I'm completely ill-equipped for the battle or the experiences that we're going to have as first responders. So yeah, I think that thinking that the fluffier, softer stuff is actually sometimes the more difficult thing to do. I think that that reframe is really, really important.
As well as you've navigated everything and as put together as things are for you right now, like, you're human, we all have challenges. So whether it's with the line of work or kind of adjacent to the line of work, I'm curious if there's still some hooks that kind of maybe not pull you off the path, maybe they do, but even just ones that you have to kind of unhook from to get back on path. Like, I know for myself, right, there's whether it's like urges or sensations or feelings or thoughts that pop up or memories, right, just curious if there's things that, you know, on a weekly or day-to-day basis, just things that still show up with you that, right, if someone sees Mitch and thinks he has it all put together, for you to be like, well, no, I still work on these things. It's like an active practice, just like you work out, keep your body fit.
Sure.
Like, what are some of those kind of daily things that you still kind of experience and have to work through?
Yeah, I think if you as a human being think that you're gonna go on this, like, personal growth journey and you're gonna get to this, like, end destination where your life just, like, ceases to have, trials and tribulations, and you cease to experience difficult emotions, like, you are completely wrong about that. Like, that is an illusion for sure, and I think that's a common misconception of people think, like, "I'll be happy when," but there's always gonna be stuff that pops up. So for me, it's just like going back, and I know this because we've worked together and I've seen some of the work that you've done with our clients of like when we talk about those two arrows of like moving towards the person that you want to become and moving away from the person that you want to become, there's a circle in the middle of that. And that circle is choice. And we have to make a choice. So for me, it's like I know that there is going to be those hooks, those emotions, those feelings. But I remember every single day and each moment of every single day, I have a choice to understand that, like, am I going to allow these things to hook me or am I not? And sometimes they do, but because I've done the work, I have that, I'm mindful enough. And mindfulness basically speaks to the ability to like be aware of what you're thinking. I know those loops right away. So instead of it being a week or a month of being in a rut, being in a loop, I catch myself almost instantly of like, Mitch, you're playing the comparison game. Mitch, you're falling victim to catastrophic thinking. Mitch, like, you're thinking about all the things that could go wrong instead of all the things that could go right. I almost notice that instantly, and I make that choice to pull myself out of that. So, of course, I'm a human being. Anger, anxiety, frustration, sadness, you name it, I feel it. But I just make that choice in the moment to pull myself out. And having that space, being mindful, allows you to create that space to make that choice. And I think that's the hardest thing because a lot of people are acting unconsciously and automatically to those things and they don't even know it, which is the worst part. Carl Jung says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you'll call it fate. So if you don't even know what is going wrong, how do you fix it? So that's what's allowed me to like have that awareness, make the choice to move closer towards that person. Sometimes it's done more gracefully than not. And I think the final thing that I'll say about that of like, instead of me having those difficult emotions and experiences and thinking like, man, you're soft, man, you're defective, you're broken, you're fragile. Like I used to think because I felt very alone because I didn't open up about these things. I always thought everyone else had it figured out. When this stuff comes up, instead of like being so self-deprecating, I'm like, hey, bro, you had a bad day, and tomorrow can be better. And on top of that, on the whole idea of like understanding good and bad emotions, like what we have to realize as human beings is like emotions are emotions. There's no real thing as good or bad emotions. That's just completely your perspective. But what we also have to realize about emotions is we need to be able to experience the full spectrum of emotion in order to appreciate the good ones. You can't feel happiness without sadness. You can't feel victory without defeat. You can't feel anxiety or like ease without anxiety. Like we need all that. So I think for me in those really difficult moments when I do get hooked, I'm like, this is just part of the human experience. And I know on the other side of that is the good part if I'm just willing to work through it. So that's the biggest thing for me. And I think that that choice analogy at the end of the day and being mindful enough to make that choice is the biggest thing.
Right.
What's the worst thing that you think someone can do after like a bad call, a very difficult experience?
Hmm. I it's hard for me to give like a straight answer, so I'm gonna just start by saying it depends, right? I'd love to kind of know that person and know the situation they're in and know their family life and what they're going back to. So to give a kind of broad response to that, I like to use this analogy of our emotions and physical sensations that bubble up and that we feel in our body. It's sort of like being a pot of water on a stove, and stress and anger or sadness, like these emotions, these things that are probably going to show up for someone on a tough call. It's like the heat's been turned up and that water is getting hot. And if I'm inexperienced in the kitchen, which I'm not the most experienced in the kitchen, right? If I see a big pot of water and it's starting to bubble and like looks like it might go over the edge, what my instinct to do is put a lid on it. And in my mind, it's like, okay, good. I covered up that thing. Now we're good, right? No more boiling water. And for people that are more experienced than me knows right away, it's like that traps the steam in and it heats it up quicker and then it spills everywhere. It's going to come out. It might look like I've covered it up. It might look like, okay, I've fixed it. That's not a problem anymore. Out of sight, out of mind. But that action is not going to help in the long run. It's probably going to make it worse. It's going to make it like force it to bubble up. So when I hear your question, right, what's kind of the worst thing that someone could do after a tough call is like whatever that version of putting the lid on it might be for you, right? So, for a lot of us, it might be having a bunch of drinks or smoking or having a tub of ice cream or pretending like that thing didn't happen on the call and just putting that brave face on. And there are things that can help us through certain moments. And I never want to like put anyone down for getting through a tough moment, however they need to get through it. But I love to be able to bounce back and forth the lens, zoom in to like, what do I need to do to get through this moment right now? And see if you can align that with, if you were to pull the lens back and be like, is this how I want to always deal with this? If I feel a heavy amount of stress or sadness, is this how I want to always deal with it? Right? So like a tub of ice cream might be good every once in a while, and maybe you give yourself that break to, have a snack, but is this how I always want to deal with it? So I would caution people to take that zoomed out lens and to consider is how I'm dealing with tough calls in this moment. Is that in line with how I would want to deal with stress for the rest of my life? Is that going to serve me? And to go back to that pot analogy, I would challenge people to consider, what are ways in which I can turn the heat down? What are ways in which I can take that lid off and let the steam out? And the best way to be able to manage some of these things are, how can I actually take it off of the stove, even if it's for a minute or for a day? And again, that's going to look different for each person. It could be me spending quality time with my kids, could be me taking the pot off the heat. Whereas some of us might think, I couldn't possibly be around my kids right now. I'm too stressed. Like that maybe there's a chance that that's a part of the solution, but maybe there's things I need to do personally to be able to then step into situations, say with my kids and family.
For sure.
So it depends, but hopefully that's
No, I think that analogy is great, and there's so many, like, great analogies, and, like, if we wanna stay with the pot analogy of, like, if you got a really good fitting lid, like, that might work for a day, for a week, for a month, but eventually, like, that pressure is gonna build, and I use the box analogy of, like, when we go to these really shitty calls, like, we can put it in this cute little box. We can put, tape on it, we can put it up in the attic, and we can forget about it. But eventually that attic's gonna get full. We keep tossing these boxes up, and we keep tossing these boxes up, and eventually, maybe not tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, we're gonna have to start opening these boxes, and we're gonna have to start making more room. And there's so many good parallels with analogies, understanding that, if we want to use water for filling that bathtub, same thing, bad calls are filling that bathtub, that bathtub's eventually going to overflow. We can't necessarily take water out. We can't have these experiences cease to exist, but what we can do through tools and strategies and, seeking discomfort and building resilience is we can make that bathtub a lot bigger. We can take a bathtub and now making it a swimming pool. And before there was an inch before it was about to overflow, but now you take that same amount of water and put it in a swimming pool. We got a whole lot more capacity. And I think that's one thing that we're really teaching in the emergency services, this idea of like building resilience, building capacity, and how that is really the way forward. But yeah, I don't think there's really any right or wrong for anyone. But I love that analogy of like, you know, what is your lid, and how can we maybe get better in the kitchen and manage those things a little bit better. So that's great.
If we stick with that analogy, just to bring it to life even more and make it really practical for people, you know, what for you, if there's a tough call, if you could maybe like think of something for each one of those, it doesn't have to be long-winded, but what was an example of how you maybe put the lid on it, like did something that wasn't a helpful long-term solution? What was an example of turning the heat down so it's kind of helpful in the moment, to kind of deal with some stress like temporarily? And then what would be an example of this was what it's like when I took it right off the heat. Like it was really a great reset and helped kind of
Yeah.
bring you back.
Yeah, for me, and I spoke about this candidly many a times, like, I definitely was drinking more than I should have. It was pretty alarming. I think a lot of first responders fall into this trap, and I think of this quote all the time of like, "Idle hands is the devil's workshop," of like, having time off from shift work is great. If you're not utilizing that time effectively, it can be very unproductive. And with shift work, it's like, "Hey, I got a Tuesday off. I'm gonna go get together with my buddies and have a couple of drinks." And then Tuesday is also Thursday, and then Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday. And before you know it, it's like, I was drinking 4 times a week. And then I like kind of started to realize that something needed to change. And just like out of curiosity one day, I looked up like what is the definition of like being an alcoholic. There's like amount of drinks threshold, and there's like, when you feel like you have to drink in order to like manage like uncomfortable feelings, when you feel that your drinking is negatively affecting your relationships. And I'm like, holy shit, I thought I was like a young guy in his 20s working as a firefighter, like to have, a good time and a few drinks, but like I met that criteria. And that's exactly what it was. Is it wasn't necessarily, it was a form of like suppression, but it was more so numbing and distracting of like whenever that stuff came up, I'm like, oh, I'm feeling a little anxious. I'm gonna have a drink to unwind and relax. So for me, like that was, I think, my vice. And going back to that pot analogy of like that drink works for so long until it doesn't. And then eventually something happens where like your body, some sort of experience just kind of, I had a rock bottom moment. Like I'm more than happy to kind of say that. I don't think it was one particular. I think it was just a season of my life where I'm like something needs to change. But I think eventually we all know like that's what I said to myself of like, this ain't it, man. Like this isn't how I want to, you know, continue to live my life. And that's when I made that change. And it was like the discomfort of, like, the regret and guilt that I woke up in the mornings after, like, not being able to moderate my drinking, that was really uncomfortable. The going through these difficult experiences and actually facing them head on, like, the obstacle is the way, the only way out is through, like you said, that was really uncomfortable. But, like, you have to pick your hard. And I had to decide in that moment of like, what was my hard gonna be? And I needed to like face the noise. I need to look at myself in the mirror, and I need to stop running from myself. Cause like no matter what you do, if it's nicotine, if it's alcohol, if it's drugs, like you can never run away from yourself. It's gonna head up eventually. And like I think that's the true difference between like thriving versus surviving in this career is a lot of people will white knuckle their way through 30 years, and they will run and run and run, but eventually, like, that's either gonna burn you out or it's just gonna just rob you of so much. It's the ones that are able to face themselves, that are able to truly thrive and, have vitality and happiness and fulfillment while managing the weight that this career brings. So for me, it was just like alcohol was probably a big one, and I don't demonize anything else. People that wanna have a drink, by all means, fill your boots. It's just not for me. I don't demonize alcohol in any way, but I saw that alcohol was robbing me of a lot, in my life, and since I stopped drinking, I've never looked back. I've never felt better. And I always joke with people, it's like, you'll never meet someone that says, man, I quit drinking. I feel terrible. So, that was a big thing. And, in addition to that, like I've developed my own, tools and strategies when it comes to, calls. And I think we'll hit on that here next, because I have a question with you. And maybe I think that's a perfect segue. What is the difference between someone who's struggling and someone who's suffering? And how do you know which one you are?
I love that question. The difference between struggling and suffering. I kind of lean into some kind of Eastern traditions, and when I think about what suffering means, and the type of therapy that I practice is very mindfulness based, and I truly believe this, and I think it's up for everyone to kind of see what way they understand these terms. For me, everyone is going to struggle. Life is full of challenges that force us to struggle. Not everyone has to suffer. And I see suffering as living life mindlessly. You sort of touched on that before, right? We can go through our days and kind of power through, put our head down, and we can get the job done, or, complete accomplishments or achieve goals in a mindless way. And there's a level of suffering that I have seen that always comes along with living mindlessly. Mindfully is the opposite, and doing things and living life mindfully, and being not mindful in the sense of like I'm mindful that someone's there, so I'm going to walk around them, but mindfulness as in I am paying attention on purpose. I'm choosing to focus on the things that I'm doing in life. And when you talk about, leaving a really difficult call, anyone that I know would struggle. Not everyone has to suffer. How we deal with that struggle can cause us to suffer. And I think struggling mindlessly leads to putting the lid on it, leads to overconsumption of drugs or alcohol or things that numb it, leads to, just trying to convince myself everything's good when it's really not. Right? These are sort of mindless actions. Like our mind is still working, so it might be hard to understand what we mean when we say mindless, because you're still thinking. It's almost being wrapped up too much in your mind and in your head, and focusing on the past or the future, like ruminating on the past is a way that we suffer. So it doesn't just have to be covering it and ignoring, say, that tough call. It could be ruminating, dwelling on it, and hyper fixated on it, and worrying, obsessing about, feeling anxious about the future is another way that we can cause ourselves to suffer. And kind of bringing back what it is to be mindful, it's to pay attention on purpose to the present moment, and to do that non-judgmentally. So if I feel stress after a difficult call, it's not just sitting with that and noticing it and feeling it. If I then am beating myself for having felt it, there's this non-judgmental piece that is really core to being mindful. And when I can acknowledge what I'm feeling and say, and that's okay, that is what I'm feeling, and not needing to label it or put myself down for having felt that, that's being mindful, and that is going to be a moment of probably struggling, but not suffering. One way I've heard about this idea too is, whenever we have, and I don't like the word negative to describe it, but like whenever I have like negative thoughts, or I'm obsessing or thinking or focusing or feeling negative things, that's a signal for me to return to the present moment. And I love that way of thinking about it. And so if you do feel yourself suffering or struggling in an overwhelming way and you don't know how to deal with it, a great place to start is to bring yourself to the present moment. The way I think about it is, we can easily get pulled around, again, dwelling on the past, obsessing about the future, or being caught up in our mind. It's sort of like being on a storm, in a storm on a boat. and the waves and the wind is knocking us all around. That's my mind going everywhere. Bringing yourself back to the present moment and being mindful and focusing on purpose on the present moment, non-judgmentally, is like the sailor dropping the anchor. And for a moment, yes, there's a storm going on, but I'm not getting rocked around by it. I'm staying grounded. And once I'm grounded, I could pull out the compass, figure out how do I want to navigate this storm. So I think suffering is no anchor. I'm going wherever the storm takes me.
Right.
And struggling is, oh, this is a hard storm, but I've got my anchor down and I'm going to decide how I want to navigate it.
Absolutely. And just a very like tangible way of like bringing yourself to the present moment is like deep breath. What do I see? What do I feel? What do I hear? Like just your senses are a very good way of anchoring you. And on that note of like some of the things that I've heard that are like the big like aha moments of like, I remember talking to a professional one time and he said, Mitch, like in this line of work, everyone is going to be affected, but not everyone gets sick. Like not everyone is going to struggle with, some of these, negative ramifications of the work. And it was like, okay, like I feel less alone now again, knowing that like everyone is going to be affected in some way or another that is struggling. But like, people that really fall victim to that, like that is when it becomes suffering, when, it's this unconscious reaction behavior, as a byproduct of that. One of my final questions is this is probably one of the things that I needed to hear when I started this job and I never did. And it was a misconception that almost set me up for failure. And I think it came from a place of good intent. When I went through fire school and paramedic school, it was like not a matter of if I was going to develop PTSD or post traumatic stress disorder. It was almost a matter of when. And I felt disillusioned as to I've wanted to do this my whole life and you're telling me this job is gonna mess me up. Like I was confused, I was frustrated, I was sad. I'm like, what do you mean? And I think the thing that I've realized through my career is like, although PTSD is a very well understood, very serious thing, there's the other side of that coin. There's post-traumatic growth. And if we're able to extract the wisdom from these experiences, those exact same trying experiences, when worked through effectively and integrated, can actually allow us to become a stronger, more capable version of ourselves. And it goes back to that choice piece. And I think that was the biggest reframe of like, yes, this job is really, really hard. But instead of thinking of like, when am I going to get sick? It's like, how can I use these experiences to have, better awareness, a greater appreciation, more perspective in this life. And that's the choice that I've used of like, yes, this stuff is very, very difficult, but we can learn from it, and it can actually make us better. For my question for you is like, talk a little bit about how we understand it's more important how we perceive an event than the actual event itself. Like how we perceive that event is going to have a bigger impact than the actual event itself. And secondary to that, like really allude to kind of that gap between post traumatic stress and post traumatic growth, and how we can really channel that into anyone who is getting into this career. Almost encourage them of like, yes, you are going to see some tough things, but those things can also benefit you and allow you to become a stronger alloy of the person that you were before you started this career.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think that's a wonderful question. The way I understand it is, similar words to you, but what I'll say is traumatic experiences are things that we have a relationship with, and we have an active role. We can have an active role in shaping that relationship, and the relationship that we build with it can determine the outcome that we have. So we can take that same concept for something like minor stress or nerves. And if I try to get rid of nerves before I go on the call, it's like putting the lid on it. It's probably going to bubble up, right? Versus, um, you know, building a really healthy relationship with nerves. So whenever nerves show up, yeah, they're uncomfortable. They're something I wish I didn't have to deal with. But I like to think of it as like an overly helpful friend. And it's like nerves are trying to signal something important to me. And sometimes I might be like, oh, you're right. I need to like do some extra stuff to get ready. Or sometimes it's like, thank you, but like, that's not helpful right now. And our response to trauma, there's a major signal going on in our body. And we deal with things however we need to. And if we deal with things mindlessly, it's sort of up for grabs for how we deal with it. If we deal with things mindfully, we can kind of get our hands on the steering wheel a little bit. So in terms of dealing with things like trauma and in this line of work specifically, right, it's very different for childhood, say, abuse, versus a first responder versus a war veteran. So just the word trauma and these labels, PTSD and post-traumatic growth, looks very different for different people in different types of situations. And the biggest thing in working with trauma and people struggling or suffering from trauma is reshaping the relationship with the thoughts, the memories, the emotions that are attached to that experience. So you mentioned earlier in our talk that, the more vivid an experience it is, the more kind of in our body it becomes, the more it kind of latches onto our nervous system. And so part of working with trauma and reaching, post-traumatic growth is relearning how to connect with our body when a traumatic response has been to shut everything down because it's too hard to deal with. Right? A really difficult call, a really difficult experience at work in the life of a first responder. The best way your body might know how to deal with it in the moment is to numb out because it can't handle it. And that's a normal response. That's actually a really helpful response that your body's taking in that moment. As we mentioned earlier, if we zoom out to the bigger scheme of things, like, is that the response that's going to be helpful for me to deal with everything that's difficult in my life? And typically it's not. And so it might take, working with a professional to be able to process that, might be doing your own work. But in terms of dealing with difficult experiences, there's some work you can do beforehand. And I think that's why it's so great, the work that you're doing, and for people getting into this line of work, to be thinking about stuff that others learn the hard way, having gone through it and having had to deal with it.
Okay.
Right. And so to be able to have an idea of what you're getting into, and like you said, to start this all, right, being told something along the lines of like, oh, you're going to develop PTSD in this line of work, or making it seem like it's a given, it's that I could imagine myself being debilitated by that and being thrown for a loop. And I as you said, like, I don't think that's true. There might be potentially traumatic experience that you're faced with, and there's things you can do to handle them with strength and courage and struggle with them gracefully and have a noble path of figuring out your way through them. And it's probably not going to be something that's fully on your own. And it's going to be something that, if you do the work beforehand and you do the work during it and you're willing to face it and deal with it and ask for support when you need it, post-traumatic growth is one of the most amazing experiences of people's lives. And it's not to make light of anything horrible or tragic that happens or that we experience, but the most challenging experiences in our life tend to be the most meaningful. And how we relate to those experiences makes it so.
Absolutely. And one thing, like, on that note, and that practice that you guys can do at home is, like, I want you to think of the most trying experience that you've been through. And again, there's going to be a wide spectrum depending on individual experience here, but I'm just speaking in general terms of, like, take some of the most difficult experiences that you've ever been through, think on them for a second. And then if I could erase those experiences from your psyche, from your existence, from your knowledge, but you would lose the wisdom, the skills, the perspective that you gain through them, would you give up those experiences? I know for me in my life, the most trying experiences that I've been through, I would not give for the world, because I think pain can be life's greatest teacher if we let it. And although in the moment it was very, very difficult, I now look back at those experiences with appreciation. I think that is a true sign of healing, when you can look back at the most trying moments of your life with gratitude. And it takes time, but that is the post traumatic growth piece of, like, man, those experiences were really, really hard, but I appreciate them. And that whole kind of perception thing of, like, you think of anxiety. Anxiety is a feeling. The story that you tell yourself around anxiety, that changes it. So if we have the feeling of anxiety, one reason is because we're dreading the conversation that we're having at work. The other feeling is anxiety is the excitement of our first date, the excitement of going on a roller coaster. Those are both the same physiological processes. It is the story that we tell ourselves and how we frame them. So if we go into these experiences thinking they're going to be awful and terrible, that's probably how we're going to experiencing them. And one thing that I heard inside of our community with one of our past clients, like we talked about this concept of priming. And our brain is a predictive processing machine. Like it predicts how we're going to react to a given situation. One thing that we hear a lot in the first responder world is like kid calls are terrible. Kid calls are the worst. And yes, some of the most trying calls that I've been on have been involving children because it's a lot more heart wrenching when someone who hasn't even experienced life has their life taken from them. But if you go into that experiencing, priming yourself that this is going to be horrific and awful and probably stick with you forever, it's probably going to be perceived as being awful and something that's going to stay with you forever. But if we're able to flip that on its head, and I've been to my fair share of kid calls of like, it is awful that they were robbed of a life they never got to live. But we talk a lot about my community of like, I get to, not I have to. And me knowing that, me seeing that, me seeing someone that has been on this planet, has only been around the sun 3, 4, 5, 6 times, not having the opportunities that I have, you best believe that I know that every morning when I wake up, I get to work out, I get to train, I get the opportunities that I have because I know and I have the perspective because of those challenging experiences that there is another person that never had these opportunities. And that reframe right there will make it so you never, ever, ever rely on motivation again. Because if you have that reframe, I guarantee if you don't feel like waking up because you're tired or you don't feel like running because you're sore and you have that reframe, I guarantee it is going to get your butt out the door. And yeah, that choice, me reframing those things of like, I get to be with that person, their final moments. No one should die alone. No one should make that transition from this life to whatever is after by themselves. The fact that I get to be there and I get to help them in that transition and be present in that transition and support their family in that transition, that is a gift. And that mind frame will take you from being the burnt out, frustrated, angry firefighter, the one that still loves going to work. And again, I'm not projecting, or hopefully I'm not projecting, but that has been my experience. When I had that reframe process, everything changed for me. So I think we covered a lot of really good things here, Riley. The last thing that I want to leave, the viewer with. If there's someone that's sitting on the other side of that camera, sitting at home right now, they've really resonated with a lot of the things that we've been talking about. And I think my experience, like people are like, bro, you're inside my brain. It's like, yeah, because I've lived it for over a decade. But if we have that person that is maybe in that season of pain, is in that season of suffering, and they kind of had that aha of like something needs to change. Like that was all very real. That was too relatable. What is maybe the chain of processes that they should go through from maybe, just getting the ball rolling versus, seeking professional help? Like, what does that look like? What would your advice be to someone, speaking in general terms, that is on the other side right now wondering like, "Okay, that all was very real. I resonate with a lot of that. Like, what should I do next?"
Well, sitting down and watching however long this is, right? I think is one big, huge step in
Yeah,
it.
if you're still here at the end, like, we've hopefully had some sort of impact.
So my message to someone that's hearing this right now as you're watching it is like sitting down and take the time to listen to a conversation like this is a step in a really positive direction. And I use this really simple formula, and it is what works for me, do more of it. What doesn't work, cut back on it or cut it out. And so one really early step that we can do is take out a piece of paper, jot down, what are the things that work for me in my life? And another way to frame that is, what are the things that I do that are in line with the person I want to be? And then what are the things that are not in line with the person I want to be? And not to make it too homeworky, but you kind of like highlight, these are the things that are fully in my control to do more of. And these are the things fully in my control to cut out, right? There's going to be some things probably not in your control on those lists. And so I really like when I work with people to start out with, I'm not going to tell you like what to do or how to live your life. I really want to learn what works for you. You don't do, oh, that works for you, but you haven't done it in a while. Why not? And like, so if you have a sense of the things that you do that are really in line with who you want to be, double down on those, right? Lean into those. That's a great place to start. It takes a little less energy than starting something new or figuring out a new path for yourself. So leaning into your strengths, your skills, your abilities, the things that do make your life rich and full and meaningful right now is a great place to start. And then starting to look at that list of things that aren't in line with who you want to be. And if it's something like an addiction, okay, I know there's addiction counselors out there, and maybe that's something I need professional help for. Maybe it's snacking on the weekends. Okay, that's maybe something that I can figure out on my own or look up on YouTube. Right? So go.
Follow everyday heroes on Instagram, maybe.
There you go. So I think that just putting people like Mitch in front of you, and screens are just a part of our life now. How's your screen time being used? Is it used to make your life better or worse? And there's so many great opportunities to learn from people online. So hopefully that's a bit of an answer for you.
Yeah, I think the biggest catch-all there is, like, if you are struggling, like, seeking professional help, again, that is not weakness, that is the biggest sign of strength. And I think one thing that I want you guys, or want to leave you guys with, is the reason that I'm so passionate about this as someone that's been a firefighter for the better part of 13 years is, like, I know what the other side of the spectrum looks like. I know what true suffering looks like. I came from the mud. I had that moment. I'm still a work in progress, but I also know what is on the other side of that. And when you experience that transition, that growth, that change, you want to grab other people by the shoulder and say, like, hey man, I get where you're at, but I know that it gets better. And I always say, like, fitness and nutrition is the starting point. That is the foundation that a lot of this will be built off of. Because if you can address that low hanging fruit, everything else becomes easier. But what I want to leave you with is understand that, like, there is a version of you 6, 12, 18 months from now where if you approach these things with true intentionality, your life can get so much better. I am third generation. I understand what white knuckling your way through the career looks like. And I don't want that for anyone. I don't want it for your job, for your community, your crew, but more importantly, I don't want it for you and your family, because the job should never take more than it gives. And taking these steps is going to allow you to not pour from an empty cup, give to yourself so you can give on to others and ultimately show up as the best version of yourself. So as we mentioned before, if you guys have been watching to this point, I hope you got a ton of value. You know the drill. As always, train hard, stay safe, own your oath. Until next time, peace. And Riley, thanks, buddy. You're the man.
Of course, brother.
Gang, gang, how long was that? Holy shit.